is Gnosticism? I mean, we know what it is historically, and you might want to give just a brief definition, but then draw that out in how it is affecting us in our understanding in the here and now.
Yeah, great question. This is there was a lot of mystical movements, special knowledge movements in the early church, and around that time. And so one of these is kind of called collectively Gnosticism, but it's actually, this is not a movement like we would say Christianity like is a movement.
Right.
This is actually multiple movements which are collectively called Gnosticism. And the one thing they had in common, these mystery movements, was they believed that God could not create the world because the world would sully God. It would make him, he was above all of that. And so he had to create some space between God and the world, these so-called demiurges or some kind of separate being between God. And so there was not a real strong doctrine of creation. So one thing the Jews had was, of course, a very powerful doctrine of creation. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And so you have this direct sense that God fashioned and made the world. Well, the Gnostics didn't accept that. They didn't believe that. And so therefore, they didn't have this whole thing is really based in a weak view of creation. So once you lose your view of creation, then of course you lose your own view of yourself as a body. So they said, going back to, Plato, etc., they're saying, well, the real vibrancy of a person is not the body, but the spirit within the body. The real you is not your body, it's you. And the Jewish worldview and the Christian worldview along with that believed in the connectivity between the body and the spirit, that these are one. These are not separate things. We don't denigrate the body. So the early church was fighting this a lot, and it became an ongoing challenge. So it really comes down to a weak view of creation. The problem is, if you have a weak view of creation, it immediately follows on that you can't have a strong view of the incarnation, which is the real main point that the church had to fight. Because if the incarnation is not trustworthy, if God could not come in the flesh, then you have a real problem, because the gospel is predicated on that fact. So if you don't have a trustworthy creation, you don't have a trustworthy incarnation. And so that became really the nexus around which the whole thing surrounded. Then today, of course, now for at least 50 years, we've lost a strong doctrine of creation in our culture, that God created the world. So it only follows, in due course of time, we lose a doctrine of the body. And so this is really a re-emergence of the same basic ideas that floated around for several centuries in the early church.